Fantasy Football 2017 NFL Week 8 Cheat Sheet. Need some quick tips to assemble your fantasy lineup for Week 8? This is big week for buys in the NFL with 6 franchises off in Week 8, so we've combed the far reaches of the internet and culled only the choicest fantasy tips and advice for your quick consumption. Below you'll find easily digestible nuggets from multiple fantasy experts, addressing some of the critical situations fantasy owners will face from week to week. Dig in and dominate. Subscribe to the Fantasy Football Beat on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Injury decisions. Stefon Diggs, WR, Vikings. Minnesota's top wideout fully practiced on Thursday and would seem in line to play Sunday at Cleveland. Diggs's return is a sigh of relief for his owners, who hope he picks up the pace he was setting through the first 4 weeks of the season. He should be in your lineup on Sunday. Leonard Fournette, RB, Jaguars. Fournette doesn't play this week with Jacksonville on a bye, but for owners wondering about his status upon his return, the expectation is that he'll be fine for Week 9. Carson Palmer, QB, Cardinals. One way or another Arizona will be without its quarterback for an extended period. Hopefully Palmer owners have another capable quarterback on the roster because typically the waiver wire has few quarterbacks with upside. For those looking, Case Keenum of the Vikings has a tantalizing matchup against the Cleveland Browns. Keenum is owned in just 11.6% of ESPN leagues. Emmanuel Sanders, WR, Broncos. An ankle injury continues to prevent Sanders from practicing and his status for a Week 8 matchup against division rival Kansas City is not looking good. Denver's offense has stalled out in recent weeks and Sanders owners have been dealing with his injury for a couple of weeks. Golden Tate, WR, Lions. Tate practiced in a limited capacity Wednesday, but even he sounds unsure if he can play in Week 8. Chances are he won't, see more below. Michael Thomas, WR, Saints. After not practicing Wednesday, Thomas, knee, returned to practice Thursday. While the team says he was limited, Thomas doesn't appear to be in danger of missing Week 8. Fringe starters. Tarik Cohen, RB, Bears. Cohen provided his owners with 7 points in standard scoring leagues in Week 7, and the impressive part is he had just 1 reception, but it went for 70 yards. It was a bit of a surprise after he had 15 touches in Week 6. By and large, he's had double-digit touches most weeks. Still, Jordan Howard is the first-team tailback and that means Cohen is always going to be a risky play. For owners dealing with bye weeks and/or injuries, Cohen is an attractive flyer due to his big playability and the fact that Chicago could find itself in a shootout or playing catch-up in Sunday's matchup in New Orleans. Cohen's production isn't a given, but he has a chance to be an RB2/flex play this weekend. Ginn, WR, Saints. Ginn has not been a factor for most of his career when it comes to fantasy football, but he became fantasy relevant in 2015 when he hauled in 10 touchdowns during the run to the Super Bowl with the Carolina Panthers. He turned in a nearly identical season in 2016 from a receiving standpoint, but had just 4 touchdowns. In his first year with New Orleans, Ginn hasn't done a lot, but he's coming off his best 2 games of the season and a popular ad on the waiver wire this week. He's owned in 54% of ESPN leagues. Drew Brees continues to spread the ball around with the Saints, which makes Ginn a tough yet appealing play. Michael Thomas is dealing with a knee injury and did not practice Wednesday, but New Orleans should have Willie Snead back in the fold in Week 8. The Saints' opponent, the Bears, have been impressive defensively. Ginn is strictly a matchup play, but in a week with 6 teams on a bye, his big playability has upside in a game at the Superdome. Carlos Hyde, RB, 49ers. Things began so swimmingly at the outset of the season as Hyde produced even as the San Francisco offense struggled. Hyde has only had 1 subpar game, which inexplicably came in Week 5 against a weak Colts defense, but bounced back in Week 6 with a pair of touchdowns. In Week 8, Hyde faces an Eagles defense that has held opposing running backs to fewer than 60 yards in 5 consecutive games. Now most pundits are suggesting owners should bench Hyde for the week. This is the reason I tend to dislike the standard start, sit-em that are a dime a dozen online. While I'm not necessarily advocating that Hyde will have a great week, most owners do not have the luxury of sitting him. This is a player whose average draft position was 44. While the matchup isn't optimum, Hyde owners should hope for a combination of 60 yards and perhaps a touchdown. Even if Hyde equaled the 88 yards he tallied in Week 7, that would probably still be enough of a contribution to keep him in the lineup. Dion Lewis, RB, Patriots. Lewis is morphing into New England's main ball carrier, having played more snaps than Mark Gisley the past 2 weeks. The Patriots face a porous defense in the Chargers, who despite playing better of late, enter Week 8 with the NFL's 31st-ranked run defense. And when New England takes a lead, that bodes well for Lewis, so I'm not alone in liking him in Week 8 and beyond. Lottery tickets that could pay off. Kenny Golladay, T.J. Jones, WRs, Lions. I mentioned Detroit last week when the team had its bye. Golden Tate was forced out in Week 6 with a shoulder injury, and while he practiced in a limited capacity Wednesday, even Tate suggests he may not be ready. The hunch here is he'll sit out Week 8. So where does that leave the Lions receiving core? Well, Marvin Jones would move into the number 1 spot on the depth chart for Sunday night's game at home against the Steelers. It's also not a great matchup as Pittsburgh is solid defensively, but given the Lions play better at home and struggle to run the ball consistently, Matthew Stafford is likely to shoulder the burden in moving the offense up and down the field. Golladay had a nice game in the season opener, but has sat out the past few weeks with a hamstring injury. He practiced Wednesday and is expected to play Sunday night. Jones is only viable if Tate sits out, and even then he's a long shot, but that's why he's listed here in the first place. Jalen Richard, DeAndre Washington, RBs, Raiders. In keeping with the theme, we offer up the 2 tailbacks who will pick up the slack for the suspended Marshawn Lynch. Oakland visits Buffalo on Sunday, so it's not exactly a great matchup, plus weather could be an issue for the Raiders as well, though that probably bodes well for the pair of running backs if the conditions affect throwing the ball. But for owners desperate to find a tailback that will get touches this weekend, this duo offers some hope. Read more. The best and worst fantasy football matchups for Week 8. Should fantasy football owners keep faith in the broken Falcons offense? Carson Wentz would make a great sell-high candidate. The 5 fantasy football moves you need to make for Week 8. It's time to trade Houston's Deshaun Watson, the number 1 QB in fantasy.